Photographic Composition, Lecture 7, Portraiture and Fashion, Part 1. This portrait of Pablo Picasso, made by Irving Penn, who was a great fashion photographer, is typical of Penn's style. A very simple lighting, one light, key light, and very simple background. But the composition is what dominates this diagonal slice that's been created between the hat that Picasso's wearing and the coat that he has on, and directing our attention entirely to his face. And yet this is not the image that's best known from this session. That would go to this image, in which even more of Picasso's face has been obscured. Even more of it is in shadow. The hat would appear to dominate, or at least you'd think that it should, because we see more of it than anything else. But that eye is still the thing that comes through the most. I'm sure that Penn was making a comment with this. Here he's photographing a great visionary of his day, someone who taught the world to look at things differently. This is an early portrait by David Octavius Hill and Robert Adamson, who were Scottish photographers. This would these days be referred to as environmental portrait, and in that it's an image that had been made in the open during an activity or between activities. And while there are a number of figures in this image, it is very specifically about this one soldier. Everyone else is either obscured by shadow or by blurring. And what comes through most dramatically is this one soldier in the center of the frame. Matthew Brady was America's first great portrait photographer. Photographed all of the rich and powerful of his day. He photographed Lincoln many times. And in this one, we see some of the hallmarks of Brady's work. We have the impression based on the gesture of the hands and his looking off to the side and down that he's deep in thought. And I think Brady understood that he was telling the story of Lincoln in as simple and straightforward a way as he could with his camera. Nadar was the French equivalent of Matthew Brady, photographed the rich and powerful in France, also in the middle of the 19th century. Here we see Sarah Bernhardt. Very simple, again, simple lighting strategy as Penn used later on. The light is off to the left in this case and from above. And the fabric and background and the gesture of the hand all contribute to our sense of who Sarah Bernhardt is or was. Julia Margaret Cameron, as I've mentioned earlier, would enlist the aid of her friends and neighbors, some of whom were quite well known, in allegorical portraits of one kind or another. I'm not sure who the character is that this girl was portraying, but that's, at least from our point of view, I think secondary to the consideration of lighting and also the composition. I mean, placing the face off to the side in the frame and under this garb that she has on is compelling and off-putting at the same time. This is a very direct portrait by Edward Curtis. He made a name for himself photographing primarily Native Americans in traditional garb for the most part, or in clothing that seemed to be, it wasn't always historically accurate, but in this case, it appears to be a bearskin, and again, very simple lighting strategy with the key light coming in from the left and a little bit above. We'll see this over and over again, but not always, although certainly we see it here. This is by Gertrude Casebeer, who preferred a softer look to her portraits. It would appear to be straightforward and direct if we only look at the face, but the fact is that there's a grace to her body, a flow to it that makes the composition look very much alive. There's an importance placed on the hands, which we will also often see. But there's something about her expression that says, I think, vulnerable and at the same time direct. Alfred Stieglitz was married to Georgia O'Keeffe, photographed her many times, and in this case, the hands were as important in telling the viewer who Georgia O'Keeffe was as her face. The very tight cropping, framing, makes this more immediate than it would otherwise be. This is another image that Stieglitz made of O'Keeffe. Here, an unusual compositional strategy in that she's occupying only half of the frame, and the rest of it is what appears to be a part of a barn. Broussais documented Paris primarily at night in the 20s and 30s. This is an image of someone from that world with all of these fantastic jewels on her hands and her wrists and around her neck. Here he's placed her off to the side, which would seem to be antithetical, and yet compositionally makes it much more engaging. We also get to see out into the rest of the bar, either through a window, but more likely in a mirror behind her and in the upper right-hand corner. This is a solarized image of Lee Miller that Man Ray made while she was his assistant. Here again, we see a very simple lighting strategy, lighting her face from the upper right, but also including a light for her hair to give it a luminous quality coming in from the left. Alexander Rodchenko was a Russian photographer, and he did some portraiture. This, I think, is interesting in that it includes the shadow from the window, and yet it is very much about this woman, I think partly because she's centered, and also because she has this very strong look in her eye that commands our attention. This is by August Sander, who we've also discussed earlier, was photographing types of people in Germany from the earliest part of the 20th century until the Second World War. Gesture, again, plays a really important part in this composition. We have the right hand on the hip and the left hand holding this hod with the bricks on it. And direct sunlight, which is actually in shadow in the lower part, but direct on this person's face. And we have this very almost stern look back from this worker. Louis Hine documented conditions that child laborers were working under in the early part of the 20th century, primarily in New York. And he understood that what was going to change people's minds was to make them understand that these were people that they were looking at. So most of his work is portraits. The conditions are included, but getting the empathy of the viewer was of paramount importance to Hine. And I think this particular image does that admirably. James van der Zee was primarily a portrait photographer who had a studio in Harlem and photographed people in the neighborhood primarily, but also people who were coming in from other parts of the country. And this appears to be a couple who've just either gotten married or about to get married, with kind of a stylized background that's been painted in part, but also includes some kind of door or a gate on the right. But again, the thing that really draws our attention is their body language, their expressions, and the fact that they're holding hands has a lot to do with how we perceive these people. James Agee and Walker Evans collaborated on a book in the 1930s called Let Us Now Praise Famous Men, which in its initial printing sold only a few dozen copies, but has become a classic of documentary writing and photography. During that period, Evans photographed Agee, who, at least judging from this portrait, didn't look happy about it, but did it anyway. Paul Strand, another photographer that we've discussed, engaged in quite a bit of portraiture later in his career. This was made, I believe, in the 40s. For the most part, he was not particularly interested in the rich and powerful. He photographed people around him in his native New England. Roy de Carava, another photographer we've discussed before, was very interested in conveying his world in dark tones. And this image of Billie Holiday would appear to be kind of antithetical to the photograph of a celebrity. But what the dark tonation really requires is that you move in and study this. And it's only after doing that that the personality becomes revealed. Here we have kind of the opposite, where George Bernard Shaw is coming out of the darkness into light. This is by Yusuf Karsh, who was known as Karsh of Ottawa in Canada, who photographed all the great statesmen and politicians of his day. This, I believe, was made in the 40s. And again, very seemingly simple strategy, although his portraiture is amazingly complex and required a lot of strategizing and create kind of painting with light. Again, gesture, very important, and how Shaw is occupying the frame where he's leaning to the side and his hand is holding his glasses. It's very important to how this image works. Halsman and Philip Halsman and Salvador Dali collaborated in a number of projects, his portrait being only one of them. And here, there's no denying the power of the mustache. But again, a very simple lighting strategy, light coming in from the upper right, and doesn't appear to be any supplemental light, probably a light on the background as well. But it's all about that face and that mustache. This is another image by Irving Penn of the writer Colette. And here we see, again, really simple strategy. It's about finding or creating light that is revealing of the subject and then waiting for the moment when the subject reveals herself, partly through gesture, the chin on her fist, and but again, the direct gaze from her at the viewer. Lee Friedlander, another photographer that we've discussed, here photographing John Coltrane in his milieu, which was the recording studio. Friedlander preferred a very direct approach, no fancy lighting. He might have lit this, but it would have been in a very spare manner. His only objective was to get at the essence of who Coltrane was through what he did. Diane Arbus is perhaps best known for her sensitive portraits of outsiders, society's outsiders. This is, I believe, referred to as Boy with Curlers, and there appears to be an ease on the part of the subject, partly due to the way she holds her, or he holds his hand, holds his cigarette and his hand, and the direct kind of easiness of his expression. Arbus very often lit her subjects with camera-mounted strobe, or a strobe that was held off to the side. Again, very simple strategy. This is an environmental portrait of Bob Dylan by Richard Avedon. We can see from the frame shadows that this was made with a large format camera and appears to be Central Park. Again, it boils down to gesture. The hands in the pocket of his coat and his knee cocked like that. And then again, the direct view back at the camera. Now, contradicting that is this image of Warhol looking off to the side and appearing to be either frightened or suspicious of something going on, and with good reason. This image was made not long after he had been attacked by a woman and shot several times. During that session, Avedon prevailed upon Warhol to show the scars from the surgeries that he had to endure as a result of his attack. Again, really simple lighting coming in from the upper right. The background is kept to a minimum, and the hands holding his pants down and revealing his scars, really telling. William Eggleston is best known for pictures of place, but also of people. I think this is particularly engaging with this woman looking very kind of dwarfed by this sofa that she's on, with the clashing floral patterns of the cushion and her dress. I think really sensational. Phil Borges has photographed extensively in Asia. This is a photograph of the Dalai Lama, a very simple, straightforward, directly lit and framed image of him in Nepal. Mary Ellen Mark is a photojournalist who has done a series of portraits specifically on twins, and in this case made with a Polaroid, more than likely as a test leading up to what would be the final portrait, but in this case the test turned out to be a keeper, and as a result we get to see the image, but within this frame of the Polaroid, which has a very specific look to it. Roshi Sugimoto is a highly conceptual photographer who keeps his imagery really spare, simple. It's clear from the start what his concept is, and has done series that are very specific. In this self-portrait, we also have a sense of it being conceptual, that he's revealing himself and not revealing himself at all by having his glasses totally reflecting light so that we can't see in. So the visionary is obscured to us, the viewers.